38 years ago, when I came to Suffolk County, one could say that I looked like the Jesus that we see on the holy cards. My mother, before she passed last year, said, "You know, Francis, you really look more like Moses." But my 8-year-old niece said, "Grandma, that's not true. Uncle Frank looks like Jesus if he lived." It's a privilege to gather with faith-filled people to really celebrate the miracle and the gift of hope. It's unfortunate that what brings us together tonight is an epidemic that is senselessly killing people of every age, of every religious tradition, every social circumstance. And as I listen to my brothers pray and share part of their own journey, I think one of the things that we who say we believe have to be willing to do is we really have to stand up and be counted. We really need to challenge the bureaucracy, those who lead us both religiously and politically. This is probably in our lifetime the greatest health crisis that hopefully we will ever see. And although so many people pay lip service to that this is a crisis and we need to do more, I stand before you, yes, filled with hope, but also frustrated because so many people now are getting on the bandwagon of saying we need to do more. And as someone that is in the thick of this and has been for decades, I don't see more. I see more people dying. I see more families being fragmented and more young people feeling overwhelmed and beaten down. I don't see more beds. I don't see, as was referenced, more of our hospitals taking the risk to reach out to those that are broken and afflicted. I see people saying nice things. And really, metaphorically turning their backs and going about their business. This epidemic is not going to go away until every church, every synagogue, every mosque, every house of prayer, every gathering place where people come together to show love and concern for each other, are willing to move beyond the stigma that addiction represents. And as we heard from our clergy tonight, be willing to speak and talk about it. As I was thinking about our gathering tonight, I was thinking about why is this so hard? And I came across in my reflection what I believe is part of the problem. I became a monk missionary Roman Catholic priest 38 years ago because I wanted to work with the poor. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Massapequa. Went on to a series of Catholic universities and felt that God was really calling me to work with the materially poor. So one of my first assignments was to teach in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. Because I could speak French poorly, but speak it, I worked with Haitian refugees. I probably learned more from those folks struggling to integrate within our community, at their courage and their faith, than I myself did. And then in the early 70s, I was transferred to Washington, D.C. And I was named building principal of a large inner-city Catholic junior high school. Although I became a monk missionary because I wanted to go to the third world, I thought that maybe this is where God was leading me, to work with the poorest of the poor. And I really felt that God was asking me to work with these really wounded young people and tried to instill with them a sense of hopefulness. And it was a wonderful experience. In the late 70s, my religious superior came to me and said, Father Pizzarelli, we'd like to transfer you. Now, I was a little reluctant to have that conversation because I thought, well, maybe God is really calling me to stay here in Washington. But we do have a mission in Nicaragua, so maybe I'm going to get my chance to work in the third world. So when this priest, 40 years my senior, said to me, we'd like you to go to Port Jefferson, Long Island, that was not the third world I had in mind. I had to look it up in the map. If you grew up in Massapequa or in Belmore like Father Brian, we didn't believe anybody lived east of the Suffolk County, Nassau County line. So I find this community of Port Jefferson. And I look it up, and I see that it has 3 hospitals in close proximity. The median salary back then was pretty high, pretty well-educated group. So I said to this man, I said, I don't really think this is really what God wants me to do. These are pretty much rich people. I said, I think I'm really suited to work with really the materially poor. He engaged me for about 40 minutes. Then after I was finished, he said, thank you very much for your input, Father. You will go to Port Jefferson. You will like going to Port Jefferson. And if you know what's good for you, you will do a good job in Port Jefferson. Well, 38 years later, I'm still there. The good job part I'll leave for others to determine. But it was probably one of the most powerful, transformative experiences in my own journey of faith. Because I went there kicking and screaming, thinking that I understood what real poverty was. And I had a baptism of fire. I was the parish priest in that Catholic church, and also the administrator of a struggling Catholic school. And being the youngest in the house, had all the jobs. So I also did replacement work in 2 of the 3 hospitals as the Catholic chaplain. God in his wisdom knew that I needed that experience. Because nothing in the seminary prepared me for what I saw in those emergency rooms in 1979 and 1980. The drugs and the alcohol that was out of control back then, but people were in denial, was overwhelming. Dealing with violence and suicide and decapitated children because of drunk driving was overwhelming. And then another transformative experience that ultimately led me to founding Hope House Ministries. It was my first Thanksgiving. By education, besides being a social scientist, I'm not a good theologian, but social scientist, I'm not so bad. I'm a clinical social worker with a specialty in addiction. And so the local precinct asked if I could be on call if people in the community were to have difficulties with their college-age kids. Rather than arrest them, act as a mediator. And I was pretty impressed back then that that's how the police were looking at things. And I said, sure. So the Friday after my first Thanksgiving, 9 o'clock in the morning, I get a phone call from the local precinct asking me to meet them at a family's home on the water. I get to that house, and there are 3 police cars in this driveway. As I'm making my way to the front porch, I see a very distraught dad that I recognize from church. He could barely look at me, and he asked me to go into his son's room. And I went into his son's room, and there were 3 police officers standing around his son. They had just cut him down. He had hung himself. He was 10 years old. As I looked at that 10-year-old boy laying on the ground with the rope burns around his neck, I was overwhelmed. And I said, like all of us would have said, why? How come? 3 days later, I offered a mass to the angels, and our little country church was packed with people standing outside. And I looked at that community like I'm looking at you tonight, and I saw a community of faith that was numb and overwhelmed. But I said to myself, how come nobody saw that that little boy was hurting? And it caused me to think about some things that I had not thought about. I realized, although that young man did not fit the typical prototype for suicide, he didn't leave a note, he didn't have troubles in school, but obviously deep in his heart and his soul, he was hurting. And I've come to believe that when anyone takes their life, or acts recklessly and endangers their life, is basically because they want the pain and the hurt to stop. And I realized that there was a different kind of poverty that I encountered that day. A poverty much more debilitating than the poverty of economics will ever be. It's a poverty of spirituality, it's a poverty of sensitivity, it's a poverty of care and concern that for too long paralyzes so many of us who are good people. For standing up and doing what's right and just, and really living the gospel, and on this feast of St. Francis, living the prayer that we prayed together just a few moments ago. And it is that poverty, my friends, that I believe is fueling the opioid epidemic to the point of being out of control. I can't tell you how many hours I spend in a given week meeting with families who are wounded and broken over the out-of-control behavior of their sons and daughters, seeking treatment. And these are not teenagers, these are young men and women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And when I outline what their sons and daughters may need to do to reclaim their life, they make more excuses than I'm comfortable making reference to. The thought of maybe having to commit to a year to 18 months is unthinkable. And then I say to them, would you prefer for me to preside at your son's funeral or empower him on the road to recovery and wellness and transformation? You're going to tell me that giving up a cell phone and technology, which is part of the problem, that he's going to get better by just going away for a couple of days. A fact. Our insurance is a disgrace, and it bothers me that no one in power is willing to take on the insurance companies. If I have one more family tell me that their son, who is in the height of addiction on opioids, has to try outpatient treatment first before they'll pay for residential care, they need to fail. They do fail. They die. And they should be sued, those companies, because they're clueless. The average 22-year-old is not going to get better going to an outpatient treatment center. When the drug dealers know that they're there and are waiting for them to come out, and all it takes is turning them back on. For those of us who know about dope sickness, no heroin addict wants to have dope sickness. And that's really hard. And now our insurance companies, for those who don't know, they'll tell you they'll pay for 28 days. It's down to 11 days. 11 days does nothing but babysit a human person. And I say that as someone who's lived in a rehab and lives presently with 55 young men every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So this is not coming from a textbook or an article that I read. It's coming from lived experience. As any of us know that battle demons, those demons don't go away in a few days or a few hours. For some of them, it takes months before they're even safe enough to let someone in and help them. And one of the other things that the research is bearing out, and I see it every day, that 9 out of 10 of the heroin addicts that I live with come with an undiagnosed mental health issue that they've been medicating for 20 years because we've conditioned males in our culture that it's not cool to say I'm hurting or something's bothering me. You got to be tough and stand strong and put up with a lot of nonsense, even if it takes your life. Well, I stand before you to say that that's not the way it has to be. No. I stand here to tell you that hope is possible and change does happen. And it's hard. And for some it takes more than one time, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times. I have a young man right now that lived with me when he was 16 years old. He's 42. He begged me this time to save his life. Because when he was in the arrogance of youth, and he thought he knew everything, everything he knew crashed and burned. And he lost everything. But there was something within him that knew that he would be loved and welcomed home to reclaim his life. My cross every day is that I have over 25 people on a waiting list. And I go to bed worrying every night, what's going to happen to those 25? I have 55 and I don't have a square inch to place anyone else. And our staff works feverishly to find at least intermediate alternatives. So when a young person or an older person is ready, we can act on it. It's scandalous that if someone needs a detox bed, that there's nothing to be found. And that our hospitals are trying to turn people away, which is against the law, just as a rule of thumb here. They need to examine anyone that walks into that emergency room, and they may not discharge them unless they are medically clear to leave. And where are the beds? The governor of this state promises us money. I've yet to see spit from the governor's office. And there's not one more bed. We have hospitals in our county with empty beds. Why not think outside the box and see if there are people who are professionally trained that would rent a floor? Every little bit helps. Seafield and some of the other professional opportunities, they themselves are overcrowded. And none of those programs other than Phoenix House are long-term. And I will argue with anyone that thinks that a heroin addict is going to get better in 28 days. Going to get better at knowing how to be a sneak and manipulate and play the game. And unless there are opportunities for those who really want to reclaim their life, we're going to continue, people behind me are going to continue to preside over funerals that we should not be gathering for. But I said yes to the opportunity to share with you, even though in many ways I'm preaching to the choir. As was made reference, all these seats should be filled. If we are truly a community that cares, every time a young person dies senselessly because of heroin or any kind of drug-related circumstance, we should all ache and bleed and feel that pain. Because we do not have the resources in place. And I'm tired of hearing people talk about the money. We don't charge anything. Everyone that works for me is licensed and insured. Now granted, that's my ministry. And that's what I've elected to embrace. But we waste so much money on so much nonsense that I can't believe that communities like ours that are represented here could not really initiate opportunities to support programs that would help our own local kids and young adults so they don't have to go someplace else. We gather in hope tonight because we believe that if we open our heart, that the Christ that lives within each of us is going to empower us by a word, by a touch, by the power of our example, to accompany someone who is broken and wounded on the journey to recovery and wellness. And it just starts oftentimes with a simple conversation without blame and shame and guilt and all of that craziness that a lot of us grew up with and unconsciously sometimes put upon those who are struggling and broken. I want to share with you something that was given to me by a mother. Her son died of an overdose. At one point, he was on the waiting list for our program, but was brainwashed into believing that he didn't need a year to 18 months. So he'd been in and out of a number of programs, never really putting much clean time together. When he passed away, when he overdosed, she found one of his journals. And this is what this 25-year-old from a good, intact, faithful family wrote about his life. Anxiety is life to me, mixed with some sobriety. Throw in notoriety. This is my anxiety. Always looking over my shoulder. Will this get better as I get older? Carrying it around like a boulder. This is my anxiety. Dark holes, deep depression, popping pill after pill in rapid succession. How did I not see the progression? This is my anxiety. Days to weeks, weeks to months, and months to years. Why is my head constantly filled with fears? Keep a straight face. Don't shed any tears. This is my anxiety. Waking up to go to sleep, climbing this mountain seems so steep. Close to the edge, I'll surely leap. This is my anxiety. That young man's potential and possibility ended with that use of heroin after being clean for 2 months. Because the pain in his life, he was not able to manage. If we're really going to turn the tide on this god-awful epidemic, it really has to be a communal effort. A communal effort that also supports the equation of body, mind, and spirit. If we are not open to spirituality, we're not open to helping people to discover the God that lives within them. They'll go for a while, and then when life gets difficult, what tools do they have to fall back on? And I'm not saying that they have to be Catholic or Methodist or Baptist or Episcopalian or Jewish or Muslim. They just need to allow God into their heart. And they need to also, I think, as they do that, recognize that the best way to sustain sobriety and wellness is by giving back. And tonight is about hope. Let me leave you with a real celebration of hope. On May 30th, 2006, I walked into Hope House hardly physically breathing, mentally vacant, and completely dead on the inside, carrying with me a feeling worse than not belonging anywhere, but rather a feeling of not wanting to be found anywhere. Today I'm writing to you about a not-for-profit agency I'm in the process of opening. I'm speechless, trying to write how such a transformation could have taken place. I have no doubt that hope is real, and I thank God every day for the gift you gave me of the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the message of hope that lives within me. Since receiving this letter, this not-for-profit agency has been opened, and it's a multifaceted mental health center that not only treats the mind and the spirit, but also the body with good nutrition. I was privileged 2 weeks ago to preside at his wedding. A young man who seemed destined to really take his life is is now giving life and reaching out to countless people who are broken and wounded, and helping them to discover the hope that He found in the journey to recovery and wellness. My friends, as we gather on this night where we celebrate hope, let me remind you that hope must become the anthem of our souls.